Hi, and welcome to this teaching from Foundation Church Belfast. My name's David. I'm the pastor at Foundation Church, and we're returning in our series through the Gospel of Mark in the New Testament, where Mark is showing us who Jesus is and what he has done, and why that is important for us to understand. And so we're returning now to the next section in our series, and we're going to read together from the Bible from Mark chapter 2, verse 13. So let me read the Bible to you, and then we'll think about what it means together. Starting at verse 13. He, that is Jesus, went out again beside the lake, and all the crowd were coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as he reclined at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And when Jesus heard it, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." We're going to see today, as we think about these verses together, who should follow Jesus, the kind of person that should follow Jesus. Secondly, then we'll think about why we should follow Jesus. And finally, number 3, how we should follow Jesus. So first of all, who should follow Jesus? This section that we've just read together is about this guy called Levi. And we can see about him in verses 13 through 15, the first half. Levi was, as it describes here, a tax collector. Jesus, it tells us in verse 13, was teaching beside the lake. He was doing his mission to teach about the kingdom of God and to demonstrate what it looked like. So he taught the good news of the kingdom, which is the realm of God's blessing, the place of God's favor, the long-awaited kingdom of God coming now. Indeed, it is here in and through Jesus himself. And he shows what the kingdom looks like by his mighty works, by restoring the sick back to fullness of life, cleansing lepers, casting out demons. This is what it looks like when God is in control, when his blessing extends to all people. Brokenness is mended, the sick are restored, sins are forgiven. And so this is what Jesus is going around teaching about. And we're introduced here to Levi, who we said is a tax collector. Being a tax collector, even today, is not necessarily considered to be a favoured job. If you work in the tax office, thank you for all your hard work. Thank you for everything you do. But it's always the pantomime villain, isn't it? When someone says they work in the tax office, they can expect a few boos from those listening. But anyway, in those days, being a tax collector was a despised job, a despicable job. Because from a Jewish perspective, what a tax collector was doing was taking money from one's own people, from the Jews, and giving it to the Roman authorities, those who were in power at the time. And to the average Jew, it felt like robbery. It felt like betrayal, that the one of our own is taking our own money and giving it to our Roman enemies. And so tax collectors who worked on behalf of the Roman government but were one of the people of the Jews had this reputation for being colluders with the enemy state. But also they had a reputation for being a bit light-fingered, creaming off the top. That's how these type of tax collectors made their money, by taxing over and above what they should have done and keeping the profits. Generally, that's how they made their living. And so as such, there are multiple reasons, as you can see, why tax collectors as a group were hated and despised by the general population. And as we see in verse 14, here we have Jesus walking by, and he simply said to Levi, the tax collector, "Follow me." And he rose, it says, and followed Jesus. instantly. Just like that. Jesus gave the call, and Levi left his tax collecting business, left the booth, and immediately followed Jesus. And then in verse 15, the scene switches from beside the lake where the tax collecting business was taking place to Levi's house. And it says here in verse 15 that Jesus was reclining at table with his disciples in Levi's house. What does that mean to recline at table? That was how they ate in those days. If someone was to give a banquet or a feast or throw a party, they wouldn't sit up like we would do these days in a chair at the table to eat our food. In those days, it was a much more prolonged affair, and the table would be very low lying, maybe just a foot or two off the ground. And so those who were participating in the meal or the feast were actually reclining. They were lying on the floor, probably on cushions, with one arm on or near the table to eat with, and the feet extended away from the table towards the wall of the building that they were in. And so that's why Jesus here was reclining and relaxing, enjoying the food. And it took a while. It wasn't just a quick come in and fill yourself and then go again. This would have taken hours and hours, probably even close to a whole day. So there he was reclining in Levi's house, but it says he was reclining with tax collectors and sinners. See, Levi was connected. He was connected to a little sub-community of people just like him. And so it seems to be that Levi invited all of his friends and contacts in to come and meet this guy called Jesus. And so there we have Jesus enjoying food with these new people. And they obviously enjoyed his company too. They were at ease with Jesus. And so this bunch of despised tax collectors, but also sinners, this group of people called sinners. Who are the sinners in this story? Well, it was a general term to describe, quote, one who deviates from the path of virtue. That's what a sinner was. The text doesn't exactly qualify the kind of person here that we're talking about, but in general terms, it was understood in those days as a subclass of morally suspicious individuals. A whole bunch of people would have been classed as sinners. Likely there was a combination of various criminals, unsavory types, perhaps even prostitutes, troublemakers, players, those who made their money in dubious ways. But added to that were often those who were in poverty, the poor, workers, anyone who couldn't keep up with the various religious rules. Therefore, they broke religious rules simply because they just didn't have the time or the inclination to live up to the various religious rules. These were all termed in contemporary religion as sinners. And there they are, all with Jesus, all enjoying his company, eating with him, hearing him talk, hearing him teach, enjoying his laughter. And probably they were sat there amazed, astonished that someone like Jesus, a religious teacher who was increasingly famous, would hang out with people like them. Astonishing. Not at all what they were expecting. And here we have Jesus enjoying food with him. I love what it says in verse 15. It said there were many tax collectors and sinners with Jesus that day, for there were many who followed him. Just seemed to be that tax collectors and sinners connected with Jesus very easily. They enjoyed him. They wanted to hear more from him. He was attractive to them. And so we see that many of them came to follow Jesus. But we also see a second group of people here. We've got Levi and the tax collectors and sinners, the first group. But there's a second group here who we'll call the religious people. We see them in verses 16 and 17. And Mark describes them here as the scribes of the Pharisees. We met a bunch of people last week called scribes, and we found out that they were the scholars of religious laws. most likely the sort of the theologians and perhaps even the teachers of religious law. But these particular ones here belonged to a religious sect called the Pharisees within Judaism. And Pharisees in general had a very high focus on ceremonial cleanliness, on moral purity, we would say today, good living. They paid a close attention to what they ate, who they mixed with, where they went, being careful, precisely careful, not to contaminate themselves in any way. The Pharisees in general were looked up to by the ordinary people in society. Often they were seen as the definition of what it looked like to be righteous. Look at the Pharisees. That's how you can tell these people are very serious about their religion. This is what it looks like to live a life pleasing to God. That's how the general population would have thought of Pharisees. Very highly regarded. But it seems to be here in verse 16 that those who were present or aware of what was going on in Levi's house, they took offense at Jesus' behavior. It says in verse 16, these Pharisees, or the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw what Jesus was up to, mixing with those kind of people, they said to him and to his followers, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" What's he doing mixing with that class of people, in other words? Does he not realize that in so doing, he's going to make himself morally compromised, that he's going to get dirty somehow by hanging out with these people? What is he thinking? Let alone eating with them, is kind of like affirming their lifestyle. Jesus, what were you doing? See, Jesus made the religious people feel very uncomfortable indeed. So there we have two groups of people who, in one sense, were attracted to Jesus. On the one hand, we had the sinners, this general group of people, including tax collectors, including Levi himself, who knew that they were, in one sense, unclean. In religious terms, at the very least. They knew that they were despised by society, especially by religious types. They knew that they were a part of a class of people just simply to be avoided by everybody else. They knew that if there was a God, they most likely were not in his good books. They most likely have lived a life that has offended God. They hadn't lived up to his requirements. That's what they knew. And yet this group of people, this group called sinners, they knew that Jesus knew about them. He knew their background. He knew their lifestyle. He knew what they had done. And yet they also knew that Jesus loved them, that he would eat with them, that he was not put off by their past or by their group or by their backgrounds. They loved him. They were attracted to him. They wanted to be with Jesus because he accepted them. On the other hand, then the second group, the religious types, who prided themselves, as we've been seeing, they prided themselves on being clean in contrast, being separate from those kind of people. Perhaps even prided themselves on being better than those people. We are not like those despicable people. We're not like those sinners, they would have thought to themselves. We have made good decisions about how to live our lives, unlike those people. They have made bad decisions. We have managed to live a respectful, moral life, unlike those sinners. That's how the religious people would have thought. We have been living clean lives. See, for them, for the scribes of the Pharisees and the religious people in general, Jesus was not attractive. He's not someone you wanted to be with. Jesus was a handful. Jesus was threatening. He challenged their own understanding of what it meant to be right in the eyes of God. Jesus, they thought, was disrupting their carefully constructed religious framework. And they found themselves threatened by him. So, who should follow Jesus? Well, everybody. I think everybody should follow Jesus. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm teaching That's why we are who we are at Foundation Church. We believe that everyone should follow Jesus. But Jesus answers the question with a proverb. Who should follow Jesus? Well, he says in verse 17, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. That stands to reason, right? You don't go to the doctor when you're feeling great. You go to the doctor when you've got a problem. You go to the doctor or the hospital when you're sick, when you need help, when you need medicine, you need some sort of support. Everybody gets that, right? And then Jesus follows up and explains what he meant. I came not to call the righteous, but the sinners. I came not to call the religious people, the people who know that they're already sorted because they've been living a good life. I haven't come to call them. They are self-sufficient. They're good on their own. They feel like they're good on their own. I've come to call those who are messed up, who need help, the sick who need the doctor. I've come to be the physician for them. Out of those two groups, the sinners, the tax collectors, those who are messed up, they know that they are beyond their own power to help themselves. They know that they need Jesus. They know that he's the only one who can do anything for them. The religious people you see are fine on their own, fine with their good moral living and their religious laws. So as we close out this first part, let me ask you, who do you identify with most in this story? The sinners and tax collectors, that group, or the religious types, the righteous ones? Do you identify with those who knew they were sick or those who thought they were well? Do you feel like you're more like a sinner, as Mark would describe it here? The irreligious, the misfits, the outcasts, the ones who have messed up, the ones who've lived a dubious life or maybe have guilt or regret or shame about the way the past has been for them? Or are you more like the religious? Those who think that they are right before God because they're just good people. They're just nice. They've done the right things. They've given to charity. They've been brought up the right way. They've made the right decisions. Who do you most naturally follow?